Hello, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Welcome back to my subscribers. And if you're new, please subscribe and hit that like button for me. So, I'm going to be going over a crazy case today that our very own John Wolf told me about, and I hadn't heard from it. I haven't heard about it before. It's kind of a crazy case, and because there is a fourth unidentified male they have DNA for, who would be the only one charged with murder in this case, is still out there somewhere. So, therefore, I wanted to try to bring this case back to light, have people get involved. Hey, ChrisBird.com. Hey, everybody. Try to get people back into looking into this case so that we can find out who this fourth suspect is, this John Doe unidentified male DNA. Whoever belongs to is still roaming around this earth somewhere. So I'm going to go. There's a lot of videos and there's a little bit of reading, but the videos are it is a well explanation of what happened from the beginning until now.
All right, so the child.
Sorry about these ads.
I will not be designating as a serious violent offense. However, I am going to run all the remaining charges consecutive to each other. So that results in, given that the one charge has merged, 38 and a half years. Is that correct, Ms. Daly? 37 and a half years. That will be served in the Department of Corrections. That leaves no time for probation afterwards, but there will be a 2-year parole term.
And you'll see why this matters in a little bit. As the trial for Fabian Gonzalez ends in Bernalillo County District Court, we take an in-depth look at the case of 10-year-old Victoria Martens' death and how we got here. Y'all, I'm sorry I kept doing that earlier. Below is an extensive timeline taking you step by step of the case from the day Victoria's body was found to when prosecutors say Michelle Martens gave a false confession, Jessica Kelly's plea deal, and the path to start of Baby and Gonzalez trial. This is the mother. Police found the dismembered body of young Victoria wrapped in a blanket in a bathtub inside an apartment on Albuquerque's west side. The girl's mother, Michelle Martens, her then boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, and his cousin, Jessica Kelly, would all be charged in the girl's death. Much of what investigators believed happened this night was based on what Martens told police in the days after her daughter was found dead. While Martin's story changed several times, the gist of it remained the same. All three took part in drugging, raping, mutilating, and ultimately killing Victoria. And this is their arraignments for both of them. Another ad.
Good afternoon, sir. Let's begin with State of New Mexico versus Fabian Gonzalez, FR 2016 4556.
John, we have received a complaint at this time. We should do a formal reading, and I do not have any probable cause challenge.
All right, sir. Did you receive a copy of the amended complaint?
I have, Your Honor, and we'll do that.
Thank you, sir. With regard to conditions of release.
Renee Garcia on behalf of Background Investigations. Relocated criminal history out of South Carolina and New Mexico. 3 juvenile contacts.
Listen to the rap sheet this guy has. That's what she's reading right now. Listen to this rap sheet, how long it is.
4 misdemeanors with 3 convictions. 11 bench warrants, 3 for failing to appear. He currently has 2 active failure to appear bench warrants that are non-extraditable out of South Carolina. Those are for DWI and littering. 2 felonies, 2 convicted as misdemeanor, attempted false imprisonment, battery DV in 2012, and abandonment of a child in 2014. He's currently booked on a PV hold, 1 failure to comply. Mr. Gonzalez reports living in Albuquerque for 3 years, currently at 4701 Irving for the last month. He reports being employed full-time at Brady Bunch Plumbing as a plumber tech for 3 years. He scored low to moderate on the REI. We do feel he's a danger to the community and has a history of violence. We're recommending a meal and cash hold.
Mr. Litchford?
State concurs, Your Honor.
Sir?
And then, the reason why we will be not going to propose to be bond at this point, we would just ask for a bond in case.
I believe that $1 million cash only is an appropriate bond, given that I believe the gentleman does pose a danger to the community. Further, I also am finding that there is not substantial community ties, such that I would be comfortable reducing bond. So based on the lack of community ties, though he does have some, his criminal history, his history of violence, I will find that the $1 million cash only is appropriate. Yes, I'm just going to go over the other conditions real briefly. Sir, you're not to possess any firearms or dangerous weapons. You are not to return to the location where this allegedly happened. You are not to possess or consume any alcohol or go into any liquor establishments. You are not to buy, sell, consume, or possess any illegal drugs. You are not to violate any federal, state, or local criminal laws. You need to notify the court of any change of mailing address. You may not leave Bernalillo County without the prior permission of the court. You need to remain in good contact with your lawyer. You will avoid all contact with anyone who will testify in this case, to include your co-defendants. Sir, the date by which you must be indicted or taken to a preliminary hearing or these conditions will no longer exist, assuming you are not released from custody, also known, sir, as your 10-day date, is September 9th, 2016. Should you be released from custody, you must comply with the conditions of release that I just explained to you until October 24th, 2016. That would be your 60-day date. Do you understand the conditions of release?
Yes.
Do you have any questions? All right. Please have a seat. We'll call you in just a moment. State versus Michelle Martens. FR 2016-4554.
John Litchford for the state.
Sir.
Because of the witness minus who's present and in custody, we have received a copy of the complaint via message request, and we choose wait for reading, and at this time I do not have any problem cost shots.
All right. Sir, with regard to conditions of release.
We did locate any
I'm
misdemeanors.
sorry, ma'am. Doggone it. It was a sir this morning.
We did locate any misdemeanors, 1 traffic bench warrant for failure to appear, no felony history, and 1 dismissed TRO. She does report living in Albuquerque for 11 years at 4701 Irving for the last 4 years, and reports being employed at Smith's in the deli for the last 3 months. She did score low on the REI. However, we do feel she's a danger to the community, and we're recommending $1 million cash only.
Mr. Litchford.
State concurs, Your Honor.
Mr. Swanson.
And again, Your Honor, we would just ask for a bond.
While I understand that there is a lack of criminal history in this case, I also believe that she is in fact a potential danger to the community. And I'm not sure that there are community ties strong enough to assure the court that she is not a flight risk. Based on that, I'm going to set bond at $1 million cash only. Ma'am, if you're able to post the bond, you will comply with the following conditions as well. You will not possess any firearms or dangerous weapons. You will not possess or consume any alcohol or go into any liquor establishments. You will not buy, sell, consume, or possess any illegal drugs. You will not violate any federal, state, or local criminal laws. You need to notify the court of any change of mailing address. You will not leave Bernalillo County without the prior permission of the court. You need to remain in good contact with your lawyer. You will avoid all contact with anyone who will testify in this case, to include your co-defendants. The date by which you must be indicted or taken to a preliminary hearing, or these conditions will no longer exist, is September 9th, 2016. That assumes that you will remain in custody. If you are released from custody, that 10-day date becomes a 60-day date, and those conditions will apply until October 24th, 2016. Do you understand the conditions of release?
Yes.
Do you have any questions?
No.
All right. Please have a seat, ma'am, and we will call you in just a moment.
A community mourns.
Surprisingly, a very emotional scene here at Arroyo Villas apartment complex. People, as you said, placing flowers and stuffed animals, saying prayers. There have been a lot of tears today as New Mexico mourns.
I know she's in heaven with angels now, and that she doesn't have to suffer anymore.
One little girl is gone tonight, the victim of unspeakable violence as the community mourns.
It's heart-shattering to me to think about what that little girl had to go through.
And while this certainly is a sad scene, that's not the only emotion area residents are feeling, as anger also runs hot.
I think about my daughter and the relationship that I have with her. I can't even imagine what would be going through somebody's mind to harm your own child.
And while those emotions reign over today's remembrance, logical questions still remain, as those same citizens wonder why.
It's very hard, because I can look out my window and I can see over to this place, and I'm just like, how is this going on? I was right here.
The memorial here, as well as the one at Petrichif Elementary School, have been growing steadily throughout the day as more and more people come out here to remember Victoria. Reporting live in Albuquerque, David Carl, KOAT.
I think since the words basically describes the video, I'm just going to play the videos for you guys, because there are a lot. And one of them's like 35 minutes long, but it explains like the whole thing, like from the, I think it's the district attorney that goes through the whole thing.
This is the absolute worst case I've ever seen in my professional experience.
Governor Susana Martinez has seen a lot of horrible cases of deadly child abuse, both as a governor and district attorney. She prosecuted the case of baby Brianna Lopez, a 5-month-old girl who was sexually abused and killed by her family members. The governor says both cases have something in common.
They were both horrific and done by people who were evil.
Martinez says she feels what a lot of New Mexicans are feeling right now.
It's not just sad, there's anger. The community is outraged, as they should be.
But she's confident New Mexicans will rally.
Community will come together. The state will come together.
As for the people accused of killing Victoria, including her mother, Martinez says if they're convicted, they should pay with their lives.
For monsters like these, and what they did to this little girl, they deserve the ultimate punishment, and that is death.
Kirsten, all three suspects pled not guilty to taking part in the rape, murder, and mutilation of 10-year-old Victoria Martens, but none of them are getting out of jail anytime soon. Court security was everywhere. First to go before the judge.
The State of Mexico versus Jessica Kelly. This is here 2016-2963.
A security officer wheeled Jessica Kelly into the courtroom.
At this time, we would waive the reading of the indictment and enter a plea of not guilty to all counts. We have no issue with the current bond of $1 million cash only.
Kelly's bond stays at $1 million. Next up, Fabian Gonzalez, also charged with raping, killing, and dismembering 10-year-old Victoria Martens. He walked into the courtroom with his head down.
At this time, we're going to enter a plea of not guilty on all counts for my client. We've gone over the indictment, and he knows the consequences of all these charges, and we just ask that you keep the bond at $1 million.
The judge did keep Gonzalez's bond at $1 million. Then Michelle Martens, Victoria's mother, was the final suspect to go before the judge. Police believe she not only took part in the rape and murder of her 10-year-old child, but according to search warrants, prior to Victoria's brutal murder, Michelle Martens arranged to have other men have sex with her child.
And at this time, we'd waive the reading of the grand jury indictment and enter a plea of not guilty to all counts.
Martin's bond had been $1 million cash only. The judge, though, went a step further.
I'm going to set it for $1.5 million.
Martens, too, was told to have no contact with anyone else involved in this case. Now, with the new rules mandated by the New Mexico State Supreme Court, Michelle Martens actually could have been released from custody because she had no prior criminal history. But today, the judge did not go for that. We will have much more on those new rules and the major impact they're having on the state's criminal justice system coming up.
The attorney for Victoria Martens' mother is asking the public not to jump to conclusions after the release of a disturbing autopsy.
Victoria is the 10-year-old girl who police say was sexually assaulted and murdered last year. Her mother was one of the 3 suspects. New tonight, the man representing her is talking to Target 7's Nancy Laughlin and weighing in on the medical examiner's report. For decades, Gary Mitchell has represented some of the most high-profile suspects and some of the state's most gruesome crimes. Now Mitchell is representing Michelle Martens.
Martens is one of 3 suspects charged with the rape, murder, and mutilation of her own daughter, Victoria. The autopsy released this week says Victoria was strangled to death, and the report shows the child had signs of prior sexual abuse, including HPV or human papillomavirus. I asked Mitchell about that in a phone interview.
I'm not certain that that's correct. The reason being that can be transmitted otherwise, and we're looking into that. I'll have to have a physician examine that and get his expert opinion, his or her expert opinion.
According to police reports, Michelle Martens told detectives prior to her daughter's murder in August, she met men online and watched them have sex with her child for her own gratification. Mitchell is now disputing that too. In one of the reports I read that she had said that there were other men that she brought to the house to have sex with Victoria. Can you talk about that at all?
Yes, we don't think that's correct, but I can't say much more than that. We don't think that's true.
We do know local police and the feds were looking at cell phones and computers belonging to the suspects to see if Martens may have recorded sex acts with her daughter. So far, no one else has been arrested in this case.
We did reach out to APD and the FBI to see if there are any other updates on this case. We didn't hear back from either agency about that. Mitchell says he will ask to move the case out of Bernalillo County and will ask to have the suspects tried separately.
I did this last time too. I'm sorry, guys. Hold on a second. Okay. Watch this.
Well, CYSD says people reported the Martens family to them 5 times before Victoria was killed last summer. The department says most calls were investigated except for one, which claimed a man tried to kiss Victoria. It's one of the most horrific crimes in New Mexico's history. 10-year-old Victoria Martens brutally killed last year, allegedly by her mother, Michelle Martens, and her boyfriend and his cousin. Tonight, CYFD Secretary Monique Jacobson finally telling us if the state knew Victoria was in danger before she died.
They were a complete and thorough investigation.
Jacobson says CYFD got 5 calls since 2015 about Victoria and her younger brother. 4 alleged neglect, like poor hygiene or babysitter concerns. CYFD says some of those calls even came from Michelle herself, blaming her ex-husband for the poor treatment. Jacobson says they did investigate, interviewing both children separately, and neither said they were being mistreated.
We had no proof that any sort of abuse or neglect had occurred.
Jacobson admits they did not investigate the remaining call from March 2016, 5 months before Victoria's death. A caller said Michelle's ex-boyfriend tried to kiss Victoria. CYFD says state law only allows them to investigate if a parent, guardian, or custodian harms a child, so they turned the case over to Albuquerque police. APD says they did look into it, but ended up doing nothing.
Attempting to do something such as kissing the child is not a crime. It has to be some sort of contact, or there has to be more to it, and for it to be considered a crime under New Mexico state law.
That's right, y'all. Defense lawyers for the suspects told me they wanted the 3 to have separate trials. Today, we have learned the state does too, and we know who will face a jury first and why.
I'm hurting so much right now.
And so are so many of you after hearing what investigators say happened to Victoria Martens the night before she was supposed to celebrate her 10th birthday.
Did you do this? Did you hurt? No, I didn't do this.
Police charged Victoria's mother, Michelle, her boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, and Gonzalez's cousin, Jessica Kelly, with the horrific crime. Charges that included raping, killing, and dismembering the child. Now we know the 3 will be tried separately.
You have to separate them so that the third defendant gets a fair trial and is not prejudiced by testimony by the other defendant or the other 2 defendants.
KOAT legal expert John Day says the state does not want any hiccups in this case, that the Supreme Court has ruled if more than one person is charged with the same crime, they're entitled to separate trials. Court records show Michelle Martens, Victoria's mom, will be tried first, then Fabian Gonzalez, then.
If Jessica Kelly, for example, is going last, then you might surmise that one of the other defendants might be giving statements or pointing the finger at that person who's going last.
And court records show Jessica Kelly will be tried last. Now, the trio are scheduled to be in court next week, where a judge will decide if the cases will be tried separately. He'll finalize that and then begin firming up those trial dates. Defense attorneys for Martens and Gonzalez tell me they will ask to have the trials moved out of Albuquerque.
Revealing jailhouse phone calls from suspects in the horrific murder of Victoria Martens.
Target 7's Nancy Laughlin has been pouring through those recordings, and some of them are very difficult to listen to. And one of the suspects, Fabian Gonzalez, maintains there's evidence that will clear him.
Fabian Gonzalez spends a lot of time on the phone with his mother.
Well, son, there was a little girl who was brutally murdered, okay?
I understand that, Mom, but I have nothing to do with that.
In 22 phone calls Target 7 listened to, he tells his mom over and over he had nothing to do with the rape, murder, and mutilation of 10-year-old Victoria Martens.
I love you.
I love you too, son. Are you okay?
Huh? I'll be here for something that you do.
He points the finger at 2 others charged in this case, his cousin Jessica Kelly and Victoria's mother, Michelle.
I feel bad for Victoria, but this is my life too, you know what I mean?
I know.
You gotta lose 2 innocent lives for 2 evil people, you know?
Gonzalez's mother says she is struggling, that she thinks about Victoria a lot.
I light candles for her every night.
Gonzalez says he has spoken to his lawyer about DNA tests.
The DNA is going to prove you're innocent. So
Exactly that, and everything else, the DNA, the scene, everything that had nothing to do with the murder or the rape or anything with Victoria.
Yep.
And you know, a lawyer won't say that, like, because he's a real lawyer. He's not just a public defender. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I know.
Gonzalez and his mother are also aware phone calls from the jail are recorded.
But we really don't want to talk about anything because they did record our conversations on TV.
But Gonzalez does talk about what he says he was doing the night Victoria was killed and about a note Victoria left for him. That story is Wednesday at 10. For Target 7, I'm Nancy Laughlin.
Heart rate's 120, BP's 140/90.
When you find a new place like home.
What role did drugs play in what happened?
The people accused of doing it are talking, and Target 7's Nancy Laughlin is listening to those recorded jailhouse calls. It's a story you'll see only on 7.
I wish I would have knew what the I was getting myself into, dog.
What she got into turned out to be one of the most horrific crimes ever in New Mexico. Jessica Kelly is one of 3 people accused of killing 10-year-old Victoria Martens and cutting the child's body into pieces.
Put me away for life.
The night of the murder, police reports say Jessica was acting weird. Her cousin Fabian Gonzalez told police she was asking if he believed in Jesus and hit him in the head with an iron.
I wish I would have been up.
In a jailhouse recorded conversation with a friend that's filled with profanity, she implies she wasn't on drugs the night of the murder.
I wasn't even I was like, no, I'm not doing no shots.
Police reports say another suspect in this case, Victoria's mother, Michelle, told detectives Victoria was given meth to make her relax, while Jessica and Fabian Gonzalez had sex with the child. Court records show Jessica Kelly has a history of arrests involving illegal drugs. Fabian has 1 drug arrest, but it was dismissed.
And then your cousin, bro, what the f*** is he thinking?
I don't know, dude. I don't get high to go. Do I get high to tweak?
Even though 3 different police reports state the little girl was given meth before she died, medical examiners refute that, saying Victoria only had alcohol in her system. Jessica seems interested in what that autopsy says.
Public, have you read it?
Huh?
The autopsy?
Yeah, no.
It's public.
When police got to the apartment, they say they found Victoria's body on fire in the bathtub, and they say Jessica Kelly was jumping from the balcony of the apartment.
I slid off the fucking top, fool. Like, I didn't, jump.
They make it seem all bro. Man, this is dumb.
I slid off, fool, and I f***ed up my right leg. I, jammed it together, I broke my ankle, my leg, and f***ed up my, joint. Because it all shattered.
And these jailhouse phone calls, Jessica repeatedly tells her family she believes she will get out of jail and be back home. In one conversation, her mother says Jessica was at Victoria's apartment that night for a reason.
Maybe God had you there to expose Fabian, and I think that's what it is.
You just heard Jessica's mom on the phone. She has gone to see her in jail. Another relative was at her last court hearing and got tossed out of the courtroom. Tomorrow night at 10, hear what Jessica has to say about that and the injury that still impacts her now. For Target 7, I'm Nancy Laughlin. This wrongful death lawsuit that I'm holding makes a lot of claims about what happened the night Victoria was killed and abused before her murder. It points the finger at police for her death, but our legal expert says Victoria's grandparents should expect some tough questions too.
People are going to be asking, look, if you're filing a lawsuit seeking money damages from the city and you're blaming it on APD, you're saying APD didn't act, it's certainly a question that's going to come up as the suit unfolds. As far as the grandparents asking People asking why didn't the grandparents step in? Didn't they have an obligation? Didn't they have the same sort of obligations?
KOAT legal expert John Day says that will play a role as the wrongful death lawsuit unfolds. Pat and John Martens, Victoria Martens' grandparents, are suing APD. The lawsuit claims the Martens did not know their daughter Michelle routinely found men on dating websites to sexually molest Victoria for Michelle's own sexual gratification and money. Last August, Victoria was raped, murdered, mutilated, and set on fire. Michelle is one of the suspects.
Gonzalez and Kelly and Martin.
Michelle's boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, and his cousin, Jessica Kelly, are also charged with the crime. The lawsuit claims Michelle watched as Fabian and his cousin raped Victoria, then killed and dismembered her. The grandparents are blaming the suspects and APD. 5 months prior to Victoria's death, a tip came into the Children, Youth, and Families Department saying one of Michelle's other boyfriends tried to kiss Victoria. CYFD turned it over to APD. APD did not investigate. This is what they told us in January.
Attempting to do something such as kissing the child is not a crime. It has to be some sort of contact, or there has to be more to it, and for it to be considered a crime under New Mexico state law.
Now the grandparents are seeking money and changes to the way police investigate allegations of crimes involving children. Now, we also found court records that show days after Victoria's death, another member of the Martens family, Victoria's uncle, filed court records so he could represent Victoria's estate and file a wrongful death lawsuit. That case was dismissed in October. Then this week, Victoria's grandparents filed a lawsuit of their own. Back to you.
Yo apoyo a los hospitales.
Investigators were looking through the suspect's phone records. Now we know what they found, and a lot of it does not match up with what the suspects said they were doing the night Victoria was murdered. Target 7 uncovered phone calls where Jessica Kelly said she was talking to her sister the night Victoria died.
I was with your cousin for 4 days. I talked to you literally hours before I was arrested.
Now court records show all three were using their phones, sometimes to talk to each other, sometimes to talk to other people. Police are now trying to find. The documents show Victoria's mother, Michelle Martens, was on Facebook the night Victoria died. She used it to communicate to the other suspects. A detective writes Martens was on Facebook online well into the late evening and into the early morning hours, well after investigators concluded Victoria was likely dead. Documents say investigators believe after Victoria was dead, her mother used her phone to send Fabian Gonzalez a picture through Facebook. She was also on her phone looking at pictures of her children and family. Remember, Martens told detectives she was asleep that night. These digital footprints contradict her story. Early in the morning on the day Victoria's body was found, documents show Jessica Kelly's phone was used to access a Maps application. Minutes later, police arrived at the apartment. And here's another interesting note. Police also found a laundry basket in the living room. In it, a white handbag filled with various items, including the suspect's IDs, credit cards, and 4 cell phones. Now, the documents show police believe the suspects were gathering up all those items to try and get rid of them. Police believe 3 of those phones were used at the time of the crime. For Target 7, I'm Nancy Laughlin.
From the start, CarMax has reimagined.
It's only been around for about 5 years, and while the company claims it's more accurate than regular DNA testing, our legal expert says it also creates new challenges. Prosecutors want more time to test 220 different pieces of DNA evidence in the Victoria Martens case. Right now, they have until January to test everything and get their expert witnesses to weigh in on it. In new court documents filed today, the state says they sent that DNA evidence to a lab in Florida last month. It's being tested using a new technology called StarMix.
It looks like it's a relatively brand new type of analysis of DNA.
The lab's website says the software is more accurate at interpreting DNA when there are samples from more than one person. In the Victoria Martens case, DNA evidence could come from the 3 suspects in her murder: Victoria's mother, Michelle Martens, her then boyfriend, Fabian Gonzalez, and his cousin, Jessica Kelly. KOAT legal expert John Day says there could be a problem, though, because the technology is so new.
It looks like other states have thrown this out. That's one of the problems with brand new scientific testing technology such as this.
Defense attorneys for the 3 suspects could come back and say that the DNA analysis is not reliable and ask a judge to throw the evidence out. The lab is also conducting additional Y-star testing that only targets male DNA and is often used in sexual assault cases. That would specifically be used for Fabian Gonzalez. How helpful would that be?
The scientists who are behind this are saying it's easier for us now to determine male versus female and so on. It could have a pretty big impact in this case.
Now, the district attorney's office tells me the request for more time to conduct DNA testing will not delay the start of the first trial, which is for Michelle Martens, starting in July of next year. For Target 7, I'm Sam.
Good afternoon. On the morning of August 24th, 2016, this community awoke to news of one of the most horrific crimes in the history of this state: the sexual assault, murder, and brutal dismemberment of 10-year-old Victoria Martens. From that day on, the public story about what happened to Victoria, about who was involved, what they did, and ultimately who was responsible, was derived almost exclusively from the statement of a single individual, her mother, Michelle Martens. Today, however, I need to inform you that many of the key elements in Michelle Martens' statement to police were false, and that much of what has been reported about this case is simply not true. For the last year and a half, my office, working in close coordination with detectives from the Albuquerque Police Department, has dedicated thousands of hours, conducted hundreds of interviews, and consulted with a range of experts in psychology, pathology, DNA, and computer forensics. And as a result of that exhaustive investigation, we have come to the following conclusions. First, although there is evidence that Victoria Martens was sexually assaulted at or near the time of her death, there is no physical evidence linking Fabian Gonzalez to that specific crime, and no independent forensic evidence that Michelle Martens knowingly permitted her daughter to be sexually assaulted on that day or at any other time. Second, multiple eyewitness statements and extensive forensic analysis of cell phone location data confirm that neither Michelle Martens nor Fabian Gonzalez were present in the apartment at the time of the rape and murder. Third, exhaustive DNA testing by the state lab has confirmed that although male DNA was recovered from Victoria's body, the lab was able to exclude Fabian Gonzalez and every other known male who might have had contact with Victoria's body, including Victoria's brother, various law enforcement officers, and first responders at the scene. In light of this information, and given the specific location of the unknown male DNA on her body, we have determined that at least one unidentified man was involved in this crime and never apprehended. I recognize that these revelations are not consistent with the public's perception about what happened to Victoria, but I want to share this information with you in order to help the community understand where this case is going and ultimately assist in the apprehension of everyone involved in this horrific crime. The first step in understanding how this case evolved must begin with an in-depth look at the steps the district attorney's office has taken as we seek to find the truth and bring Victoria's killers to justice. Upon assuming office in January of 2017, I immediately ordered a comprehensive review of the case against Michelle Martens, Fabian Gonzalez, and Jessica Kelly. Although the matter had been pending for several months at that point, I was concerned that a substantial amount of investigative work had not yet been initiated. Specifically, an in-depth analysis of the cell phone records and location data, detailed pretrial witness interviews from key eyewitnesses, and forensic examinations of various biological samples collected at the scene. As a result, I determined that it was necessary to establish a dedicated team of experienced prosecutors, paralegals, and support staff to undertake the monumental task of completing the necessary investigative work and preparing the case for trial. The team immediately requested expedited DNA analysis of multiple biological samples, obtained court orders for cell phone records and location data, clarified a number of outstanding questions regarding the forensic pathology, and conducted in-person interviews with a number of primary witnesses. After initiating this process in June of 2017, we received startling information from the state lab regarding the presence of an unknown male profile on Victoria's body. At that point in the investigation, we did not know if this DNA might have been the result of transfer or scene contamination, and began the arduous process of trying to eliminate all law enforcement and first responders from the pool of potential contributors. At the same time, we received detailed information from several key witnesses at the scene, which narrowed the time of Victoria's death to between 7 p.m. and 8:45 p.m. on the evening of August the 23rd. More importantly, however, these same eyewitnesses provided detailed, independent accounts that Victoria was seen alive after her mother and Fabian had left the apartment, but that her apparently lifeless body was seen before they returned inside. As a result of the DNA findings and this critical eyewitness testimony, the team began to have serious doubts about the credibility of several key elements in Michelle Martens' statement to police. Indeed, she had given multiple conflicting statements about the cause of Victoria's death, ranging from accidental overdose to suffocation to stabbing and finally strangulation. More importantly, however, the timeline she provided to police regarding her movements and that of her two co-defendants did not align with the physical evidence recovered at the scene and statements provided by multiple independent witnesses. In light of the team's deepening concerns over these initial findings, in the summer of 2017, I made a special request to the Albuquerque Police Department that we receive additional investigative support to track down leads and evaluate a growing body of evidence that seemed to contradict the final version of events set forth in Michelle Martens' statement. Thankfully, APD granted my request and detailed 2 experienced detectives to augment the ongoing work of the primary case agent. Joined by these detectives, our team ordered additional specialized DNA analysis from an independent lab, located and interviewed additional eyewitnesses and known associates, and obtained more comprehensive cell phone information related to all 3 defendants, including detailed GPS location data from both cell phone carriers and Google applications. With each new round of testing and with each additional piece of information, more and more doubt was cast on Michelle Martens' direct involvement in the murder of her daughter, Victoria. Indeed, we were forced to consider the possibility that Michelle Martens had falsely incriminated herself and Fabian Gonzalez in this heinous act. As you can imagine, the idea that a mother would falsely admit to witnessing the horrific acts in this case was hard to comprehend. But in light of the growing body of evidence that directly contradicted her narrative, we were forced to carefully examine that possibility. To that end, in August 2017, I directed the team to contact one of the nation's foremost forensic psychiatrists, Dr. Michael Wellner, chairman of the forensic panel, to methodically examine Michelle Martens' statement to police, her psychological background, and indeed Michelle Martens herself. To aid in this evaluation, we provided Dr. Wellner with all relevant background information we had on Michelle Martens, including her videotaped statement to police from the day of the incident and other case-related materials. Dr. Wellner also sought out and interviewed a range of witnesses who have known Michelle Martens for years. Finally, in March of 2018, we arranged for Dr. Wellner to conduct an in-person interview with Michelle Martens to evaluate the possibility of her susceptibility to providing false information to police. After examining all the background information, reviewing her videotaped statement, and conducting an in-person interview, Dr. Wellner concluded that Michelle Martens made numerous false admissions to police. Specifically, he noted that although she was not coerced, several factors relating to the structure of the interview, her recent intoxication, post-concussive trauma, and suggestive questioning all contributed to her providing statements to police that were not truthful. He also noted that her statements were often contradictory, inconsistent, and evasive. Dr. Wellner further noted that she exhibited a unique set of personality traits that made her susceptible to providing false information on matters of grave importance. Indeed, multiple sources confirmed that years earlier, Michelle Martens denied that she was pregnant up until the day she had actually given birth to Victoria. In light of this unique psychological profile and considerable independent forensic evidence, we were forced to reevaluate the basic foundation of the case, given the following information. 1. Michelle Martens' statement to police was evasive, inconsistent, and filled with provable, factual inaccuracies. 2. Several key elements, including the assertion that she trafficked her daughter for sex or witnessed her sexual assault and murder, either could not be independently corroborated through forensic analysis or flatly contradicted by the physical evidence. 3. Several witnesses not only provided a precise window with respect to when the crimes were committed, but also independent verification of the fact that neither Michelle nor Fabian were present in the apartment at the time. 4. Cell phone and detailed Google location data corroborated those eyewitness accounts and definitively placed Michelle and Fabian outside the apartment at the time of the rape and murder. 5. Multiple biological samples recovered from Victoria's body demonstrate that although male DNA was present, none of that DNA was positively linked to Fabian Gonzalez, and at least one unidentified male profile was found on the body. Not surprisingly, this new evidence has dramatically affected the criminal cases against 2 of the 3 currently charged co-defendants. After verifying that neither Michelle nor Fabian were present at the time of Victoria's rape or murder, a fact confirmed by multiple independent sources, we concluded that those specific charges must be dropped from their respective indictments. At the same time, however, we have also determined that there is a strong factual basis to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that both engaged in child abuse by placing Victoria in an obviously dangerous situation, which ultimately resulted in her death. In keeping with that assessment, Michelle Martens has today accepted responsibility for her role in allowing Victoria to be placed in a position of danger. And at 1:30 this afternoon, she pled guilty to 1 count of reckless child abuse resulting in death. She faces a possible sentence of 12 to 15 years in prison and is expected to cooperate in the future prosecution of the 2 currently charged co-defendants and assist law enforcement in identifying and prosecuting any other individuals found to have participated in this heinous crime. Likewise, we have also filed a motion to amend the indictment against Fabian Gonzalez, removing counts pertaining to his alleged participation in the sexual assault and murder, while maintaining charges of child abuse resulting in death for his role in allowing and facilitating an obviously dangerous situation which led to Victoria's death. At this point, Mr. Gonzalez is scheduled for trial in October of this year. The case against Jessica Kelly, meanwhile, is largely unaffected by the newly developed evidence in this case, and she remains charged with an open count of murder. She is expected to go on trial in January of 2019. And finally, in light of the most significant development in the course of the case to date, I have today authorized the filing of a criminal information against the unidentified male whose partial DNA profile was recovered from Victoria Martens' body and who remains at large. For the past several months, we have worked diligently with federal, state, and local law enforcement to identify and investigate numerous leads regarding who else was involved in this crime and bring them to justice. However, as that remains an active and ongoing investigation, I cannot comment on the specific steps initiated by law enforcement or any potential leads, other than to say that we do not believe this to be a random act of violence but rather connected to those already implicated in this crime. I recognize that today's announcement will come as a shock to members of this community who, based on incomplete and inaccurate information, may have already formed an opinion about this case. But I want to assure the public that the District Attorney's Office and our law enforcement partners remain committed to identifying anyone who had a hand in this crime and bringing them to justice. We owe it to Victoria to get this right, and that's exactly what we intend to do. With that, I'll stand for questions.
So, when did you know that this case was starting to fall apart, per se, and did you know this before you went out to the legislature and asked for more appropriations?
We've been aware for some time that there were some significant evidentiary issues that were presented by the case. And we were working closely with the Albuquerque Police Department and specifically the two detectives that they detailed to try and fill in a lot of the gaps. It took the better part of the summer, frankly, to eliminate the possibility that the unknown male profile was not a scene contamination or some other known law enforcement or first responder. And so that process was ongoing and has been ongoing for some time. The evaluation that was conducted by Dr. Wellner took a lot of background work, and it required his ability to make assessments of her psychological profile, contact witnesses, and then arrange for us to have an in-person interview so that he could evaluate her in person. That didn't occur until March of this year.
You're saying last summer, correct?
The first information that we got about an unidentified male profile was received by this office last summer.
You talked about unidentified male profile and DNA evidence. Has that DNA been linked to anything else? Any idea of who this person is?
No, and it's important to understand that right now it's a partial Y profile, and that partial Y profile is actually not eligible for comparison through the CODIS system, pursuant to the standards that they use. It's sufficient for us to exclude Fabian Gonzalez and other known males that were in the apartment, but right now we have not been able to positively link that DNA profile to any specific suspect.
Could this identified male have a part in the murder of Victoria Martens?
Yes, that's exactly why we filed the criminal information. It's titled "The State of New Mexico versus John Doe," and the reference is with specific reference to the DNA profile. We'll have copies of the information for you for review.
So you talked about the recent murder, but her body was found in a horrible way. When did that all happen?
So we believe that the dismemberment happened late on the night of the 23rd, and not close in time to the fight that originated the police call out on the 24th. But right now, it's our belief that that happened sometime between 8:45 and probably midnight on the 23rd.
And when Michelle and Vicky aware of that, were they involved in doing that usually?
We don't have any independent information. Once we took out and determined that Michelle Martin's statement was not credible because so many conflicting causes of death were offered and because she had given so much information that simply didn't line up with our physical evidence in the timeline, we couldn't rely on that information anymore. What I can tell you is that none of the male DNA that's recovered from her body, from Victoria Martens' body, is positively linked to Fabian Gonzalez. And I can't comment on what may still be presented at the trial against Mr. Gonzalez in October.
Raul, do you all think that Jessica knew this unknown male, the man that you're looking for?
We don't believe this to be a random act. And so we think that this is someone that is connected to the three in some way. And we're still exploring all the possibilities. And obviously that's an area where, in terms of this being an ongoing investigation, I can't provide too much detail, but I can tell you that we're working actively with state, local, and federal law enforcement to try and identify who this person is.
Did you all run it through the federal database to see if this DNA came back with the hit?
So that the partial Y profile cannot be compared through the CODIS database because because it's a partial profile. And it has to be a comparison that's done through a buccal swab, meaning we have to identify a particular individual. We have been making contact. Not only were we able to exclude law enforcement and other first responders, there are other individuals that are associated with the currently charged defendants that we have obtained buccal swabs from and have excluded them from the potential list of suspects.
Raul, when you say that this case sat there for a little bit before you were able to get a roundabout team on it and start taking it apart, do you think that had anything to do with us not being able to get a solid case on Victoria or on Michelle and Fabian?
I think that there should have been a dedication of additional resources immediately when it came into the office. And I know I've had conversations with, the leadership of the Albuquerque Police Department and others about how to expedite that and learn from that experience. I can tell you that I ordered a review of this case, a presentation by the assigned prosecutors at that time in the second week of January after taking office. We initiated and assigned the new team the following week, and we started to receive information by March. So we acted immediately once we had the opportunity to move on that information.
Can you say with the DNA, are they related to Jessica and Fabian, because they're cousins? So could you swab them and see if they're related?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
With that DNA that you have, can
Yep.
you tell if they're related to Jessica and Fabian, because they're cousins?
We don't have, it's an unidentified male profile, and right now Fabian has been excluded. We haven't done other types of genetic testing, and I'm not sure that the sample is sufficient enough to get into that level of detail.
Have you already dropped the charges against Fabian?
We're amending the indictment today, and you'll be provided packets of the amended indictment along with the motion that set forth the legal basis for doing that.
Is it fair to say that possible DNA can't be used to run through the database, but can be used to exclude persons of interest?
That's correct. If we have, as we have with Fabian Gonzalez, law enforcement personnel, other first responders, because one of the things that we were concerned with is, could it have been possible that some other first responder, someone who was, an EMT, a police officer, had contact with the body, and that person was showing up in the testing? We've been able to take direct buccal swabs, swabs that you take inside someone's mouth, and compare that against the profile, and they've been excluded. If we are able to do that, we're also able to identify potentially a suspect, take their profile, match that to the DNA, and make the connection.
So we're saying there's no evidence that shows that Michelle and Fabian had any participation in the dismemberment, the burning, anything like that?
At this point, we don't have any information about that. What I can tell you, and we presented this so that there could be a clear understanding of the timeline, is this is a rendering of cell phone data. Actually, it's Google data that was retrieved from Michelle Martens' phone specifically. And so Victoria gets off the bus at 4:25. She gets home. Michelle and Fabian are not present, but they return home at 5:07. At that point, at 6:05, Victoria went with Fabian to the gas station. Then she returns home about 10 or 15 minutes later. Shortly after that, around 7, you have, or around 6:30, Michelle and Fabian go away. They leave the house, and then they return at about 7:02. Around that time at 7:05, Victoria is seen alive by neighbors. And at 7:06, Michelle and Fabian leave the home. At 7:38, they're seen at Rio Bravo, or the phone pings them at Rio Bravo and Coors. Sometime later, closer to 8 o'clock, they're seen at 5 Points and Bridge. And then you'll see their car travel back to the residence about 8:47. But from those same eyewitnesses, Victoria's body is seen being carried outside the apartment at the time that they return. And that's how we're able to establish that they weren't present when the murder and the rape was happening.
Do we know what time they got back?
At 8:48. That's what that shows you, and that's what that rendering
So
shows.
it happened sometime between 7 and 8:45. They got back at 8:48.
That's right.
Does this show any type of discredit? Are we discrediting AP's work in the beginning, saying that, Michelle Martin's statements were then inconsistent? Is this showing any discreditation to them?
I think that obviously there's some false admissions and some false statements that Michelle made in the course of her interrogation. I've had a conversation with the mayor, chief of police, the deputy chiefs, and the entire command staff involved in the homicide unit. They understand what this evidence shows and reveals, and I'm hoping to have a conversation with them about how we can learn from this and improve the type of investigative work that we see at APD.
Do you think that Michelle and Vivian should ever have been charged with the rape and murder?
I think based on the information that they had at the time, and looking back at what they knew, I mean, they had a statement from somebody who, if you look at it, they thought, based on the information they were providing, that they had enough information to charge these individuals. You have to remember, we didn't have a lot of the psychological information about Michelle's background. We didn't obtain these records or the location data until months afterwards. So the doubt that we now have about everything that we see in that statement, I don't think was apparent to anyone in the first, 24, 48 hours when they're trying to make charging decisions. The important thing is that now that we have this information, that we, rethink everything that we and everyone in the public understands about that case.
If you discredited Michelle Martin's statement, nothing that you discredited your statements reflect on Jessica. What information connects her to this case?
So
obviously you still feel that there's something strong that you tested in this case.
I can't comment on the case against Jessica Kelly as she's pending trial in January. What I can tell you is that none of the newly disclosed information, any of this evidence, changes the fact that she's going to be charged with an open count of murder, and that's how we plan to proceed with her.
Michelle Martens was facing 20 plus charges, including murder. Raul, are you really, I guess, content with it just being now down to one charge of child abuse resulting in death? Is that fair?
Well, look, this gets into fundamentally, I think, the role of a prosecutor in a community, and it touches directly on our ethical obligation to hold everyone accountable for what they did, but to make sure that we're only pursuing cases and charging people for what they've committed. And that original charge included charges of murder, included charges of watching and witnessing sexual assault. Once those things are provably false, we have an ethical obligation to hold her accountable for what she did. I'm not saying Michelle Martens is innocent. She isn't. She just didn't do murder. And so what we did today was accept her plea to reckless child abuse resulting in death, because she did contribute to a situation that allowed her daughter to be killed. And she needs to be held accountable for that. But we have to balance that, and I think, have to look carefully at all this evidence to make sure that we get it right. Because the most important thing is that we don't have a rush to judgment, that we don't, if a prosecutor is confronted with evidence that's inconsistent, the last thing you want to do is have people in our positions ignore that type of evidence. Because then we could be in a situation where we find somebody who was involved 15 or 20 years from now, and we're having a conversation about letting people out of prison for committing a murder that they didn't commit.
Given everything you know about her psychological state, and with this deal she has to help in the pending trials, how helpful do you think she's really going to be given all the false information she gave?
Look, we obviously need to be very careful about any information that we get from her. But I think now that we understand who we're dealing with, and now that we understand her psychological profile, and we also understand how to structure these interviews in a way that we can independently verify information, I think that's the key. That old adage about trust but verify, we're going to have to verify all those pieces of information. But more than anything else, we're looking to build a comprehensive picture of everyone who was involved with all three of these individuals, not just the day of the event, but in the weeks leading up to it.
Are you able to say if she's been helpful at all thus far in giving you any leads on who this unidentified male may be?
I can't comment on any statements that she has made at this point because, again, they may become relevant at some later proceeding. What I can tell you is that we're very carefully evaluating any information that is being provided, not just by her, but others who may have knowledge about this case.
What about the fact that it's not a serious violent offense?
Again, this is the plea agreement that we felt best fit the crime that she committed, which is, again, recklessly causing this death through child abuse. And we think this charge fits her conduct. And with regard to the sentence that's attached with that, that's not a judgment that I get to make. That's a judgment that's rendered up in Santa Fe.
You said that she had committed child abuse. Her and Fabian, I'm speaking of Michelle Martens, had committed child abuse that led to the death, and that's what you're charging her for. Can you explain their role? Did they leave Victoria at the home?
Well, I think that's the most obvious component of child abuse, is permitting this child to be left in a situation where she was obviously in danger. And again, I can't comment on a lot of the facts that I believe are going to come out in the trial against Mr. Gonzalez and the trial against Jessica Kelly. But there is a factual basis for the idea that she knew that this was a dangerous situation and that she left her child in a dangerous situation. Not that she planned or participated in murder or sexual assault, but at a minimum, she should have known not to leave her child in that situation.
You can find this unidentified male in terms of, are you guys still getting DNA swabs from multiple places, have already tested multiple DNA swabs?
Without commenting directly on the ongoing investigation, I can tell you that we have obtained buccal swabs from a number of individuals in the community and eliminated them as suspects.
Are you working towards a similar kind of plea deal with Fabian Gonzalez?
At this time, we are not engaged in any plea negotiations with either the two remaining co-defendants. One thing I did want to point out, although we have been working diligently on identifying this unknown male for a matter of months, I want to encourage the news media and members of the community to make use of Crime Stoppers and the number here on the screen. In light of the fact that we have a new understanding of the nature of this case and the individuals implicated in it, we're encouraging members of the community to provide additional information if they have additional information about any of these three individuals and or Victoria Martens in the days and weeks leading up to her death. We need to know who is responsible for this and bring them to justice. And that's what we're trying to do. So we're relying on the community to make use of this number, if they have any information at all, to provide or share with law enforcement.
Where does APD in the mayor's office stand in all?
I still haven't seen a phone number scroll across the screen.
I've been in constant communication with the mayor, the chief of police, the entire command staff, and the homicide unit. They're well aware of the developments in this case. In terms of, right now, they are committed to keeping the two specially detailed detectives that we're currently using to run through a number of leads. And beyond that, I would refer you to the Albuquerque Police Department for any additional comment. Right. The two original prosecutors in the case were reassigned in January. It was my sense that we needed to have a more experienced team involved, and we need to have dedicated resources. I don't want to try and second guess at this point what information they had access to. I think everyone in the immediate aftermath of this horrific crime focused on the statement that Michelle Martens made. And I think they took it at face value. And it wasn't until we started getting back DNA evidence and phone records and lots of other things that the pieces of this puzzle just didn't fit. And so I'm trying to give people the benefit of the doubt that Once we have that kind of information, we adjust and make the right decisions, and that's what we did.
You guys have the correct stop was up because you guys are asking the public to help with this unidentified man.
That's right. That's right.
You said that there's no evidence of the traffic prior to that night. She did have an SUV in the basement. What's going on with that? Is there any issue that is?
Right. So the only information that we have about a verified prior sexual encounter was one that was actually immediately reported by Michelle Martens herself, which obviously runs counter to this notion that she was also engaged in trafficking her daughter. She took immediate steps to identify and notify the relevant law enforcement officials. And as far as we know, severed contact with that individual. In terms of the forensic side of it, I know that there's been a comprehensive analysis of cell phone records, computers, and the like, and there is absolutely zero evidence of texts, chats, child pornography, or anything else that would support this notion of an ongoing sex trafficking situation. Again, because it was given and provided in the context of this larger statement, which we now know to be false, I think it casts real doubt on it. As to how exactly Victoria became a victim, and obviously she was at some moment, we don't have information or evidence to verify who that was or when it occurred.
And have you talked to Fabian and have investigators been interviewing Fabian and
So, right, I can't comment at this point on anything to do with ongoing aspects of the case that may, become part or relevant to a trial against Mr. Gonzalez or Jessica Kelly in January. All right, folks. Thank you very much. I appreciate.
For some reason, when I played that one, there was an echo, so I had to mute myself. That was a long one. Thank you for sticking with me through that. But I hope that it shed some insight on the case and what actually was happening with the case. So when he made
Appreciate your time.
When he made this, when they actually filmed this, it was, I believe, in 2017. I want you to realize this crime happened in 2016 on her birthday. We're now in 2023. 2 of these suspects just got sentenced and went to trial at the end of last year. This DNA of this unidentified suspect that they have, this guy has been running for 7 years. This year will be 8 years. I think it was in August that it happened. So almost 8 years. I feel like we have got to get this girl's name back into the spotlight. I think that if we do, and it gets talked about more and more and more worldwide, like all these other cases, then possibly this suspect will make some more screw ups or something. Something might maybe happen. This is almost 8 years ago. This is insane. And then why did the mom lie? We just saw this.
Yesterday, the district. Sometimes a cough isn't just a cough. Victoria Martens' body are partial male samples. According to our expert, that DNA will be helpful to prosecutors, but it's likely going to be very limited. Just months after finding out there was male DNA found on Victoria Martens' back, on Tuesday, District Attorney Raul Torres announced they found more DNA.
Not just on her back, but all over her body, including under both, on fingernails of both hands, not just one hand, as well as the presence of male DNA around her neck.
The DA's office says these partial DNA samples have been tested, and they are continuing to look for the unidentified male accused of raping and killing the little girl. But are these DNA samples enough to find a match to this mystery suspect?
It really depends on how much DNA they did find on these samples. Typically, especially under the fingernails, for an unknown individual, it's typically limited.
DNA expert Erica Everhart says that typically partial DNA samples can't be combined to get a full match of DNA, but she did say that this partial DNA can help eliminate potential suspects.
With neck swabs, I typically have seen multiple individuals on the neck of an individual, 2 or more, because that is an area of the body that is exposed to the outside elements.
Everhart says that DNA can be altered, washed away, or masked by other factors in the home.
If the bathtub was used to wash her, then it is potentially that the DNA that could have been there could have been washed away, or now it's just a limited amount of DNA.
And I asked our DNA expert whether partial DNA profiles are entered into CODIS, which is the FBI's state and national DNA database. She said that partial profiles are not entered into that system. For Target 7, Marissa Armas, KOAT Action 7 News.
So it's a partial DNA. I wanted to say something and I forgot. So Michelle Martens pleads guilty to a lesser charge for reckless child abuse resulting in death. Much of the original case centered around what Martens told police in the days after her daughter was killed. Martens' story changed several times, saying all 3 took part in drugging, raping, mutilating, and killing Victoria. Turns out that wasn't true. Evidence continued to contradict the overall narrative Michelle Martens told police about the night her daughter died. Statements about the part she took in her daughter's death and other information like trafficking her daughter to men in the past just didn't add up. Evidence was never found to substantiate her claims. Ooh. A psychological profile showed Michelle Martens had personality traits that made her susceptible to false confessions. During discussions with an outside medical expert that interviewed Martens, that doctor determined Martens made numerous false confessions in this case.
Sometimes a cough isn't just a cough, so it's better to be prepared. Keeping Binax Now handy makes it easy to test.
This whole investigation was based on what Michelle Martens initially said. The Albuquerque Police Department says those statements pointed them in the wrong direction.
It's one of the most horrific cases in Albuquerque history. 10-year-old Victoria Martens brutally raped, murdered, and dismembered. Investigators thought they had it right, but
she did make false statements. I think she made misleading statements that led detectives down a wrong path.
District Attorney Raul Torres introduced new evidence pointing towards a 4th suspect, which means Victoria's mother, Michelle Martens, lied.
That everyone seemed to, took at their word. I mean, who would guess that a mother would say anything false about what happened with their daughter?
APD says their whole investigation was based on what she said happened that night 2 years ago. Now looking back, that's 2 years this investigation has been headed in the wrong direction.
Everyone at the time built the investigation around the statements from Michelle Martens, which we now know to be misleading statements.
They say they have their best officers on the case.
APD has devoted resources and some of our best detectives to the investigation to help the district attorney and basically to help unravel the misleading statements that Michelle Martens initially made in this case.
Working from square one to figure out what really happened.
We want to see that there's justice in the end.
We reached out to former APD Chief Gordon Eden to see what he had to say about these false statements from Michelle Martens, and he said this to us: "I have no comment. When I left, I left. There's a new police chief, and now you should talk to him." For Target 7, live in the studio, Shelley Leggett, KOAT Action 7.
So Jessica Kelly, the girl that was the girl who I suspect knows who this unidentified male is, who is also the boyfriend's cousin, asks for a plea deal, and the judge rejects it.
Sometimes a cough isn't just
was raped, murdered, dismembered, and set on fire back in 2016. Well, just minutes ago, a hearing wrapped up for that woman, Jessica Kelly. We learned she tried for a plea deal where she'd plead guilty to 6 charges, but not a murder charge. Well, the judge did not accept this plea deal. Victoria's mother, Michelle, and Kelly's cousin, Fabian Gonzalez, had their murder charges dropped this summer. They are now both charged with child abuse resulting in death. Now, a 4th suspect is facing a murder charge, but right now, investigators do not know who that man is. They just have some DNA taken off of Victoria's body. Of course, we have a full team of reporters and photojournalists at the courthouse today to cover every angle of this story for you. Right now, let's go to Action 7 News reporter Sasha Leninger, who just stepped out of that courtroom. Sasha, can you break everything down that happened in there?
Yeah, Todd, a lot unfolded in this courtroom. But let's start with that plea deal that Judge Charles Brown turned down. Now, in that plea deal, Jessica Kelly would plead guilty to 6 different charges. Now, let me list them for you in this. It would be child abuse resulting in death, aggravated battery with a deadly weapon, 3 counts of tampering with evidence, and as well as conspiracy to commit tampering with evidence. Again, the most serious charge there is the child abuse resulting in death. We're told by Judge Charles Brown, Jessica Kelly, if accepted, could spend 18 years behind bars for that guilty plea alone. But here's the whole deal. Judge Charles Brown wanted to understand why Jessica would plead guilty to child abuse resulting in death. There was a lot of talk back between Jessica and the judge and both sides here. And we actually learned a little bit more about what happened that day back on October 26, 2016, and who this 4th person is. They did not name who he is, but we do know Jessica did tell the judge that day, she let Victoria back inside of the house. Victoria was outside somewhere with no supervision because Mom and Fabian Gonzalez were not home. So Jessica put Victoria back inside of the house. We're told Jessica did admit that she gave Victoria some sunflower seeds and the remote control to watch cartoons. And then it was time for Victoria to go to bed. So she put on her pajamas and went into her bedroom. Somewhere in that mix, a unknown man, according to Jessica Kelly, entered the house or the apartment there. She says they left the door unlocked and the doors also open a little bit. She claims that unknown man went in, said he was looking for Fabo. And according to Jessica Kelly,
Who leaves the door unlocked and the door slightly open with a 10-year-old sleeping in the bed in the house, period? Are you waiting for someone?
Fabo is a nickname for Fabian Gonzalez. She said she and Victoria Martens were the only 2 home at that time, and that's when that man proceeded towards Victoria's room. Now, the judge says, did you know what was going to happen or what was going to ensue after that happened? And at the time, Jessica did admit that she was tweaking and did use meth. And didn't think anything was going to happen. She says that unknown man was dressed very well and seemed like he knew the family. If you remember, Jessica was let out of jail just a few days prior to this incident. So she didn't know who he was, but said he was well dressed and seemed like he knew who the family was. And after all that happened, she says that unknown man went to Victoria Martens' room, and that's when everything had happened. Jessica says she did not think that unknown man would do what she claims he did to Victoria Martens. But the Judge Charles Brown, said that was not it. He cannot accept that plea deal with those 6 counts if that is the answer for the child abuse resulting in death. So that is why, Todd, he dismissed that plea.
Sasha, appreciate the update. Wow, what a development in this case today. We'll be back with Sasha, of course, at 4, 5, 6, and 10 tonight. Less than 3 months after Victoria's mother, this all happened less than 3 months after Victoria's mother, Michelle, took a plea deal of her own. In June, you may remember Michelle Martens pleaded guilty, saying she is willing to testify in the trials of Fabian Gonzalez and Jessica Kelly. Again, she and Gonzalez are no longer being charged in her murder, in Victoria's murder. Investigators say both were out of the apartment at the time Victoria was killed. Jessica Kelly seemed to echo that with her statement today with what Sasha was just saying. So let's just recap everything today then. Jessica Kelly accepted and tried for a plea deal, pleading guilty to 6 charges, including child abuse resulting in death, the most serious one. The judge...
Okay, so do y'all see, I don't know if this was said before, do y'all see the charge she was going to take for aggravated battery. And then you saw the guy had a black eye, and you saw the mom's nose was all busted up. Supposedly, I read on another website that this Jessica Kelly person, when the parents came home, she hit them with an iron. That's why she was going to take an aggravated battery charge.
Judge, however, says he will not accept this plea deal. Here's what was in that deal here. Kelly would give up her right to remain silent, meaning that she would then testify in the trial against Fabian Gonzalez and this mystery fourth suspect who she described there. Kelly did today. Kelly would face at least 18 years in prison under the current deal. But again, the judge has not accepted the plea deal at this time, at least. Now, we do know the district attorney was going to be holding a news conference to discuss today's decisions, but they have now delayed this. I don't know if they were expecting a different answer from the judge, but again, that news conference was delayed. We have several crews working hard right now to bring you every angle of this developing story with complete coverage you will not get anywhere else. We'll cut back into programming if we look.
Sometimes a cough isn't just a cough, so it's better to...
Okay, so John, this is a big deal. Why did prosecutors drop the charges?
Well, apparently they realized right on the eve of trial that their expert forensic witnesses were not going to be able to support the idea that that Victoria was raped. They didn't have the scientific evidence, the forensic evidence to convince the jury. And so rather than being embarrassed in front of the jury providing charges that they can't support, they've decided to dismiss.
I was just going to say it would look very bad. So this wouldn't indicate, say, a plea deal or anything like that?
Not necessarily. In fact, I think it shows the opposite. It means they're moving forward. They feel like they have enough evidence to support murder and tampering with evidence charges, as well as battery charges.
Common for something like this to happen? I mean, we're just so close to the trial.
It does happen in big cases like this, especially where the scientific evidence just isn't there. I think they may have been thinking that they've got, the more they look at it, they've got to decide, can we present this, or do we have a strong enough case? And in the end, they didn't want the jury to have weak charges.
Okay, perfect. John, thank you very much.
And then they finally, in 2019, reach a plea deal with her.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. As you know, a little less than an hour ago, Jessica Kelly entered into a plea agreement with the state of New Mexico to resolve the outstanding charges and the pending trial that she was facing with respect to the killing of Victoria Martens. Under the terms of that plea agreement, she agreed to plead no contest to 6 counts, including child abuse resulting in death, aggravated assault with a deadly weapon, conspiracy to commit tampering, and 3 counts of tampering with evidence. This brings to a conclusion the case against Ms. Kelly and subjects her to 50 years of total jurisdiction in the Department of Corrections. It does not, however, conclude the prosecution of all the individuals who are responsible and accused in the death of Victoria Martens. And our attention now turns to the pending trial of Fabian Gonzalez. We are fortunate under the terms of this agreement to have the benefit of Jessica Kelly's cooperation in the prosecution of Mr. Gonzalez, and again have her cooperation in the potential apprehension and hopefully the eventual prosecution of the unidentified 4th male who was also involved in this horrific killing. This plea agreement is largely the same as what was proposed by the state and agreed to by the parties last year. The primary difference is that the plea that was entered is one of no contest as opposed to the guilty plea. The parties, as you know, intended to enter into that plea agreement, but that agreement was rejected by the court. we were able to fashion an agreement that substantially exposes Ms. Kelly to the same amount of time in the Department of Corrections and satisfies the concerns of the court and also brings some finality, at least to this second of the three suspects that are charged with the death of Victoria Martens. One of the things that I think it's important for the community to understand is this is not a decision that we made or that I made lightly. I understand full well how traumatic this case has been for members of the community. And it is not a perfect outcome. It is not something that is, I think, ideal in terms of what we all would like to see happen in these cases. However, we are confronted as prosecutors with our ability to present cases based on the facts and the evidence that we have. We, as you know, identified some issues with the original investigation, which altered the course of our prosecution, and had to inform our decision to enter into this plea agreement. There were a number of additional unanticipated procedural developments and rulings by the court that also, I think, supports the idea that we should enter into this agreement so that we can bring certainty to the community and move us towards obtaining real justice for Victoria Martens.
Which you still haven't done years later. So basically,
and with that,
she took a plea deal. She took a plea deal to testify against Fabian.
Well, again, with this plea deal, Jessica Kelly will not only testify against the other suspects in this case, she is now sentenced to more than 40 years behind bars. Here's how it all went down in court today. Jury selection was supposed to begin in Jessica Kelly's trial for the death of Victoria Martens. Instead, this happened.
No contest.
Jessica Kelly pled no contest to child abuse resulting in death or great bodily harm, aggravated assault, and multiple counts of tampering with evidence. In her plea deal, court records show she told investigators she was high on meth, babysitting Victoria, when a man she didn't know came into the apartment and killed the little girl. Kelly says she told her cousin, Fabian Gonzalez, Victoria was dead. Kelly told investigators she and Gonzalez dismembered Victoria. Then the pair put the little girl into a bathtub and tried to clean up the crime scene. The court records show that same night, Jessica Kelly grabbed an iron and hit Victoria's mother, Michelle, in the forehead. After Michelle Martens and Fabian Gonzalez left the apartment, Kelly set Victoria on fire, then tried to run from police. Kelly has now agreed to testify against Gonzalez and that fourth unknown suspect.
Because of today's plea, we now have Jessica Kelly's cooperation, and I believe that that case is significantly strengthened.
District Attorney Raul Torres says that was a huge reason he signed off on this plea deal with Jessica Kelly.
One of the things that has sort of haunted me from the beginning is this notion that we would be forced into a place where we wouldn't be able to hold everyone accountable, either because of the evidence and because of the facts. And unfortunately, that's the nature of what it means to do this job.
Jessica Kelly's attorney says with good behavior, she could get out of prison in about 20 years. In the past, though, while serving time for unrelated crimes, she did get into a lot of legal trouble when she was locked up. For Target 7.
Jeez.
A lot of people have expressed their opinions about what happened inside one of these district courtrooms, but QET legal expert John Day says it's a decision that was made because the state didn't prove that Fabian was a danger to the community.
If people are frustrated, that's certainly understandable.
It's a feeling many New Mexicans know when they hear the name Victoria Martens, a 10-year-old girl murdered and dismembered on her birthday. in 2016.
There have been cases that have taken a long time to get to trial. There have been cases where defendants who are awaiting trial and it's been a long time are released. That's not unusual.
The state thought they had it right with the arrest of Victoria's mother, Michelle Martens, as well as Fabian Gonzalez and his cousin, Jessica Kelly. But that theory unraveled.
We remember what the prosecutors said when this case started. They thought they had this theory of what happened. They thought they had the suspects. They thought they knew what had occurred. And in fact, we remember Michelle Martens, Victoria's mother, completely changed her story.
Now another piece is coming apart.
The way the laws of New Mexico work, it's basically up to the prosecution. It's up to the DA's office to prove to the judge that Fabian Gonzalez is dangerous to the community and that there are no conditions that could keep their community safe.
Judge Charles Brown ruled Gonzalez will be released from jail until trial with no GPS monitoring.
Basically, the judge is saying, based on the evidence, based on what the prosecution has presented, there's really no reason to keep him locked up.
A decision that has many wondering, will there ever be justice for Victoria?
Now, Judge Brown said that Fabian doesn't have to wear a GPS monitor, but it actually will be up to pretrial services to decide if he has to wear one or not. Live in downtown Albuquerque, Shelley Leggett.
Here we go with the sentencing. Now, remember, the mother pleaded guilty, so she was already sentenced. So now we just have the sentencing of Jessica Kelly, who they came up to, with a plea deal for, as long as she testified against Fabian, and then we have him. So this is her sentencing. See how much she gets, how much time she gets. What happened? I don't know what just happened.
Today, a woman connected to 10-year-old Victoria Martens' murder sentenced to 50 years in prison. Jessica Kelly pleaded no contest to 6 charges.
Our legal expert says it's likely she will spend the rest of her life in prison. Anchor Caitlin Norwood is here with details.
Beck and Shelley, the case itself still has a ways to go, but this was a big step. Kelly is the first of 3 suspects to get sentenced. This is part of a plea deal, and soon she'll testify against her own cousin.
Asking that you put her away so she cannot do this to anyone else.
The judge then announced the sentencing.
Total sentence of 50 years. Pursuant to the agreement of the state and the defense, 6 years will be suspended, resulting in a 44-year sentence in a Department of Corrections.
It gives the Martens family a little bit of closure in this case. This case has been going on for a long time.
In the plea agreement, Grayson said Kelly agreed to testify against Gonzalez and says she's already given a pretrial interview. Our legal expert, John Day, thinks this sentencing will impact the others.
Any judge is going to be looking at this as a benchmark to show, these are cases that are going to get a lot of very harsh sentencing.
As for the others facing charges, Fabian Gonzalez is set to go to trial in July. Meanwhile, the child's mother, Michelle Martens, has already pled guilty and is awaiting sentencing. They says she faces up to 18 years behind bars. Doug, back to you.
Kelly also has 5 years probation after serving the 44 years in prison. We contacted the defense team. They decided not to comment.
Wow, that's a lot. That's a lot. That's a lot.
Sabrosas, salitas y rico.
Found dead inside an apartment. The trial underway now for the man police say had a role in what happened the night she died.
This case is about the defendant creating a danger that resulted in Victoria's death, and his participation in covering up that crime.
Jessica ran away and has blamed everyone else ever since.
Opening statement started at 9 o'clock this morning. Gonzalez's cousin Jessica Kelly and Victoria Martens' mother Michelle both took plea deals. We've just learned Kelly is taking the stand right now. Fabian's lawyers claim Jessica Kelly is the one who killed Victoria, while the state argues Fabian put Victoria in danger by taking her mother away from her on the eve of her death. And day one of this trial is wrapping up. Fabian Gonzalez is accused of tampering with evidence and reckless child abuse resulting in death. Sasha Leninger has been covering every twist and turn in this case since the little girl was murdered 6 years ago. She was in court this morning for opening statements. And Sasha, who took the stand today?
So, Shelley, things here just wrapped up about a couple of minutes ago, and the first witness to take the stand today was a retired police sergeant who was one of the first officers on the scene that day on August 23rd of 2016 that found Victoria's body in that bathtub. Now, the court did play the video of his body cam lapel the day that it all happened. You will not see that video here on KOAT. That sergeant, along with 2 other officers, were called very early that morning. He says he first talked to Fabian Gonzalez and Michelle Martens, who then said her daughter may be dead. That's when they go into her apartment and find the little girl inside of that bathtub with part of her body on fire.
I had this fight going on inside of me that, my head told me that she was dead. My heart wanted me to do everything I could for that little girl. And one of the things that was really haunting me was that I didn't check her pulse. Even though I knew she was dead, I didn't make that effort to check her pulse. So I went back in, checked her pulse.
And now inside of that courtroom was Victoria's grandparents, and at times you can see them in tears. Now, the judge does expect this trial to take at least 3 weeks. The testimony list, the witness list, is a very long one, and it does include Jessica Kelly, who did take the stand about 30 minutes ago. She will be back on that stand tomorrow morning. Shelley, back to you.
All right, Sasha, thank you.
I'm not going to play the trial, obviously. He was sentenced already, so I'll show you that. So August 1st, 2022, August of last year, which was only months ago, he was found guilty on all counts. Mind you, this happened in 2016. October 27, 2022, the end of last year, he was sentenced.
Is a serious violent offense. However, I'm going to run all the remaining charges consecutive to each other. So that results in, given that the one charge has merged, 38 and a half years. Is that correct, Ms. Daly? 37 and a half years. That will be served in the Department of Corrections. That leaves no time for probation afterwards, but there will be a 2-year parole term.
The boyfriend got 37 and a half years in prison. The boyfriend's cousin just got sentenced to 50 years. Now we'll see what the mom gets sentenced with. Now, this whole thing is simply because I want to, again, bring all this information out simply because this fourth person...
The father of Balloon Fiesta is Sid Cutter. His legacy and image display...
What the heck?
I think Mr. Mitchell hit on a couple of things that were pretty important to discuss when considering what the appropriate sentence for Ms. Martens is. And I just want to highlight those with some specificity here from what I recall from the trial testimony, mainly from the neighbors in the apartment complex about Victoria. And the reason I want to highlight that is because, as Mr. Mitchell pointed out, good children, well-behaved children usually come from, involved parents who love them and take care of them. And I recall from, and I don't remember the names of the witnesses that testified, but I do remember there was one neighbor in the apartment complex where Victoria and her mother lived that said Victoria would help her all the time. And I think she referred to Victoria as her little buddy. That there was a number of neighbors that remember Victoria being happy, helpful, and just a sweet little girl that, was inviting everybody to her birthday party. And of course, all these adults that were being invited to the birthday party were actually planning on going to the party because Victoria was such a sweet little girl in the neighborhood. And again, that sort of goes to what was going on with the parenting with Michelle up until Fabian entered the picture. I recall the photos of the apartment even after this happened, and the photos of the apartment. And one of the photos had a collage of the children on the wall, and it just goes to show that there was a lot of time and care that was put into making this collage of her children that Michelle put together. And it shows how important these kids were to her. It was a clean apartment, very well cared for. And so again, that sort of paints this picture of what was going on in that home with Ms. Martens and her children before Fabian entered the picture. From what I saw in
recognize just how quickly this was going to go bad. I am not going to grant the retroactive good time. I don't think that that's appropriate under the circumstances. I do recognize, Ms. Martens, you've been doing a lot of hard work at MDC, and I appreciate how you've been helpful there and, working towards bettering your life. I appreciate that, and I don't want to diminish that hard work you've been doing, because I know that a lot of people go to jail and they don't do that work. They don't do that hard work. So I appreciate that. Pursuant to the agreement that you reached with the state in New Mexico, they agreed there were mitigating circumstances, which Ms. Staley pointed out, which I think I discussed and your lawyer did as well. And the mitigating circumstances basically show that you shouldn't be looking at the 18-year sentence that would normally you be facing with this type of conviction. And so the state had agreed to give it to the discretion to me, along with your lawyer agreed to give the discretion to the court, whether the 18 years should come down 3 or come down 6 years from the 18. I think under the circumstances and for the reasons we discussed, that I will mitigate it down to the 12 years of incarceration in the Department of Corrections. Of course, the 6 years that you've already served at MDC will come off that 12 years, but I am not going to give, like I stated, that retroactive good time, which would mean that you wouldn't serve any additional time. So that's what I'll do. The remaining time, I'm assuming, let me double check here. We've got some supervised probation, correct?
We do, Your Honor, that's correct. There'd be supervised probation, and there's also parole.
Right. All right. So when you're on probation and parole for the time that you're not going to be serving in custody, Ms. Martens, I want you to continue with the treatment that you've been getting at MDC, the moral recognition therapy, and all the work that you've been engaging in. I think is important for you to continue with your rehabilitation. So you'll continue with that. You'll also do any other therapy or sort of ongoing treatment that probation authorities think would be appropriate for you. I'm going to order that you're not to possess any weapons and you won't use any drugs or alcohol. You'll also do random drug and alcohol testing. I will waive probation costs entirely. And you'll pay the fees associated with this conviction, which include a $100 DNA, $5 domestic violence, and a $75 crime victims reparation. You will get the credit of 2,270 days of pre-sentence confinement against the 12-year sentence. All right. Anything else for Ms. Martens as far as sentencing goes from the state? Nothing from the state, Your Honor. Mr. Mitchell?
No, Your Honor, and I've seen a copy of JNS that came through here, and we'll get that done today.
All right, I'm actually going to complete it right now. And so the only thing that really looks like it's going to change is what the actual sentence is. So I'll insert 12 years.
Yes, Your Honor.
So what we have here is a 10-year-old little girl, Victoria Martin, was killed on her 10th birthday. The mother's boyfriend, and the boyfriend's cousin were all charged with neglect of a child resulting in death, and the cousin got more charges. Hence the black eye and the messed up nose is because the battery charge that the cousin got, that was for that. The cousin got 50 years. The boyfriend got 37 and a half years. And the mom got 12 years. 6 she already got credit for because she served that time before she was sentenced. So therefore, she has 6 more years to serve. So she will be out in 2028, unlike the rest of the other ones. However, we need to get this information about this John Doe suspect. And this is the last thing before I leave. Police are still searching for a 4th suspect, a John Doe. After a DNA profiling match, a male was found on Victoria's body. That DNA profile is the only one charged with murder in this case. This little girl's murder will not be solved until they find this John Doe. The people that are in jail right now are not in jail for anything to do with her death. We have got to find out who this person is. And I really hope that you guys share this. I really hope that we can get her name out there again. And hopefully someday soon we'll be able to find out who that 4th suspect, the person that DNA belonged to, and get justice for Victoria. So once again, thank you for spending almost 2 hours with me. I know it was a long live, but I felt like you needed to know the beginning to the end, and how long of a time span it was from the beginning to the end. And like I said, please share this information. I hope that I see her name everywhere on the internet now, and hopefully soon we'll get this piece of shit that's still running around. Alicia, that was all false stuff that she told the police. All of that was false. The drugging was false. The only thing that wasn't false was the sex acts. I believe that they said everything else was not true. So basically everything the mom said, other than she didn't kill her daughter, was false. And I played it earlier in the live if you want to like skip through it or whatever. There's a 36-minute video I showed of the DA explaining everything and how the mom lied and how they know she lied and everything else. It might explain more to you. But again, everyone, yeah, it is crazy. Thanks for coming in, and you guys have a great night.